The islands of the Philippines, a sun-drenched archipelago of emerald jungles and sapphire seas, existed in a curious historical limbo as 1941 drew to a close, acquired by the United States after a violent campaign against Filipino independence seekers. American colonial policy had often veered between genuine efforts to uplift and a pervasive, patronizing air of civilizing our little brown brothers. Infrastructure, education, and the promise of independence by 1946, a future framework already set, created a complex tapestry of loyalty. For many Filipinos, the American presence was a familiar, if imperfect, reality, preferable to the looming shadow of Imperial Japan. For Staff Sergeant A.B. Abraham, who had shipped to the Philippines in 1939, it was a paradise of lazy, warm days, the palmy shores, the extravagant butterflies, the jungles dense and green, a place of hunting, cockfights, and a leisurely pace that felt far removed from the gathering storm. That idyllic facade shattered with the brutal suddenness of a tropical squall. On December 7th and 8th, 1941, as the attack on Pearl Harbor crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet, a devastating Japanese aerial offensive against Luzon wiped out a significant portion of the American Air Force on the ground. The skies over the Philippines, once a symbol of American reach, instantly belonged to Japan. This was more than a tactical defeat. It was a profound psychological blow, shattering the deeply ingrained American myth of invincibility. Washington, prioritizing the European theater, swiftly deemed the Philippines a lost cause, a strategic decision made thousands of miles away that severed crucial supply lines and condemned the defending forces. The disconnect between the promises of reinforcement and the grim reality of abandonment created a chasm of despair for the troops on the ground, a feeling that would fester into a bitter resentment. The defense of Bataan became a prolonged, agonizing crucible of attrition. General Douglas MacArthur, having implemented a defensive war plan Orange that was now moot without naval support, issued communiques promising help is on the way, even as he prepared for his own evacuation to Australia. The peninsula, a finger of land jutting into Manila Bay, became a rat trap for some 78,000 American and Filipino soldiers, alongside 20,000 Filipino civilians. Their resistance, though heroic, was doomed not just by enemy action, but by a more insidious foe: disease, malnutrition, and a catastrophic lack of supplies. Their bodies, weakened by vitamin deficiencies and rampant pathogens, became more vulnerable than any Japanese bullet could make them. The struggle was not a series of decisive battles, but a slow, grinding depletion of life and morale, each passing day a testament to a forgotten fight. By early April 1940, the physical condition of the command was rapidly approaching the 0 point. General Edward King, left in charge of the Bataan forces after MacArthur's departure, faced an impossible choice. Defying orders from higher command, King made the courageous unilateral decision to surrender, aiming to prevent further senseless slaughter. That evening, the peninsula erupted in an apocalyptic symphony of self-destruction. As the men destroyed their weapons and equipment, ammunition dumps detonating in vast displays that lit up the southern tip of Bataan. It was a final, desperate act of defiance against a fate they could not escape. For Lieutenant Thomas of the Signal Corps, the decision to surrender was intensely personal, made without the benefit of protocol or precedent. Before the war, surrender was never spoken of, an unspoken taboo in American military culture. On April 9, 1942, with his heart pounding like a mallet, Thomas tied his undershirt to a branch as a flag of truce and crept to the road, waving it at approaching Japanese soldiers. He had no idea what to expect from the enemy. His initial encounter with a Japanese lieutenant offered a surprising, if unsettling, kindness, cigarettes, food, even a wrestling match. But this individual humanity was a fleeting illusion. Later, Thomas and nearly 50 American officers were assembled behind barbed wire. A Japanese colonel, accusing them of atrocities, announced 10 men would be executed. As a joke, Thomas was among those selected, forced to dig his own grave, standing at its threshold as rifles were aimed. "I was really going to shoot you," the colonel revealed, "but then I decided on this joke." The Japanese burst into laughter, leaving the men hugging each other with tears of disbelief, shattered by the profound psychological torture. The surrender of Bataan, the largest capitulation in American history, became a symbol of heroic Bataan psychological torture. The surrender of Bataan, the largest capitulation in American history, became a symbol of heroic Bataan. It exposed the brutal realities of strategic decisions made far from the front lines, shattering American myths of invincibility and the unspoken taboo against surrender. For those who survived, it marked not just the end of organized resistance, but the beginning of profound and unimaginable hardship, a descent into a news of perifadings. The surrender of Bataan, an act of desperate necessity, did not bring peace, but merely shifted the battlefield. From jungle to road, from open combat to the brutal confines of captivity. The Japanese command, crippled by logistical failures and a profound underestimation of the sheer number of American and Filipino prisoners, found itself with a human tide it was ill-equipped to manage, their rigid adherence to flawed plans compounded by a severe oil shortage that rendered motorization almost impossible condemned tens of thousands to a foreshedded. This chaotic movement, known forever as the Bataan Death March, was less a calculated atrocity and more a horrific consequence of systemic ineptitude and escalating brutality, fanned by figures like Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, who openly advocated for extreme measures against bastards like this. Rogue orders to kill all prisoners, transmitted by field telephone, were obeyed by some commanders, turning the march into a prolonged, agonizing gauntlet of suffering. For those who survived the 75 miles of torment, the journey culminated not in freedom but in the gates of Camp O'Donnell, a desolate, disease-ridden place that devoured men's bodies and spirits. It was a transition from the physical exhaustion of combat to the soul-crushing inactivity of prisonerhood, a profound psychological trauma that stripped away all agency. O'Donnell, a putrid incubatorium for disease, quickly swelled beyond its capacity, becoming a place where systematic suffering took hold, marked by the sun treatment, arbitrary punishments, and catastrophic death rates. The very air seemed to reek of despair. When the survivors of O'Donnell were moved to Cabanatuan, they entered a new phase of their ordeal. This camp, established as the largest continuously running American POW camp on foreign soil, began with malign neglect and a shocking lack of basic medicines, leading to initial death rates so high it rivaled O'Donnell's grim tally. Yet, within its squalid confines, a remarkable resilience began to emerge. Prisoners, hardened by the Great Depression, instinctively began to organize, building a semblance of order and sanitation. They created a tropical enclave of America, with named streets, a library, and even social clubs, culminating in a zero-death day, a fragile victory against the forces of annihilation. The arrival of Red Cross packages, though often pilfered by guards, brought not just sustenance, but a vital psychological lifeline, a tangible sign that America had not forgotten them entirely. Yet life within Cabanatuan remained a daily struggle against a relentless enemy, starvation, disease, and the constant threat of violence. The dehumanizing effects of extreme deprivation were profound. Minds, dulled by rice brains from the starchy, unnutritious diet, found solace in obsessive thoughts of food, leading to gastrosadomasochism, the perverse pleasure of tormenting one another with elaborate descriptions of imagined meals. Rumour-mongering became an assiduously practiced sport, a desperate attempt to grasp at any shred of information, however unreliable, and descriptions of past, a desperate attempt to a grace-bound but 23. To break the excruciating tedium and monotony. Amidst the physical deterioration, close-knit survival groups formed, friendships becoming legendary, like the two men who shared dentures, binding men together in a shared fight for existence. Acts of extreme selflessness became quiet legends, testaments to a humanity that refused to be extinguished. Beyond the barbed wire, an unseen war of resistance and intelligence simmered. Inside the camp, defiant acts of ingenuity flourished. Homer Hutchison, a virtual genius, painstakingly pieced together a clandestine shortwave radio from scavenged parts, hiding it beneath the library. Its relentless broadcast of war news, including the music of Frank Sinatra, was a vital antidote to Japanese propaganda, a whisper of hope in the darkness of 5-or tape. Inciting attacative and text, a bit of whole benefit had homed at the Japanese majors of Frank Sinatra was a vital antidote to Japanese major of Frank Sinatra was a vital antidote to Japanese major propaganda. When Japanese guards, suffering from widespread gonorrhea, sought sulfur drugs, The prisoners retaliated with a cottage industry of counterfeit pills, crafting beautiful gems from tooth powder, a symbolic act of vengeance for 3 years of unexpressed rage. Outside in the occupied cities, the resistance was equally daring. Claire Phillips, famously known as High Pockets, transformed her personal grief into a powerful weapon, fueled by patriotism and the loss of her husband in Cabanatuan. She opened Club Subaki, a high-end officers' club in Manila. Under the guise of a cabaret owner, she charmed mesmerized Japanese officers, cajoling vital intelligence from their alcohol-befuddled lips. This information, relayed through daring Filipino runners, contributed to significant Allied victories. More critically, Phillips used the club's profits to orchestrate an elaborate smuggling operation, sending tens of thousands of quinine tablets, anti-tetanus serum, and life-giving calamansi juice to the forgotten men of Cabanatuan. But the price of defiance was immense. The Kempeitai, Japan's brutal military police, were ever present, their shadow a constant threat. The capture of a runner carrying a Greek New Testament with an inscription revealing Chaplain Robert Taylor's connection to High Pockets led to the unraveling of parts of Phillips' network. Taylor endured brutal torture in a heat box, confined for months in an awkward squatting posture, his legs withering, his body ravaged. Phillips herself faced the terrifying water treatment in the dungeons of Fort Santiago, where brackish water was poured into her, making her feel like she died all over again. Highlighted the immense risks of resistance, the constant, sickening fear of discovery that hung over every clandestine operation, and the terrifying capacity for cruelty that defined the occupation. As 1944 drew to a close, a chilling precedent was set, amplifying the dread among all remaining Allied prisoners. On December 14th, at the Puerto Princesa prison camp on Palawan, the Japanese, desperate to eliminate evidence of their atrocities and prevent prisoners from aiding the impending Allied invasion, initiated a systematic exterminated. 150 American POWs, lured into air raid shelters, were incinerated with high-octane aviation fuel and then machine-gunned as they desperately tried to escape the burning pits. Only a handful survived, including Army Private First Class Eugene Nielsen, who, despite being shot twice, buried himself in garbage and undertook a desperate 5-mile swim across the bay to freedom. His harrowing testimony and that of the other 10 survivors brought this atrocity to light, underscoring the immediate existential danger to every American sword. POW, still in Japanese hands, the gates of hell, it seemed, were opening wider. The vast strategic machinery of the Pacific War, having churned through island after island, now focused its immense power on the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur, driven by his iconic vow to return, orchestrated the invasion of Luzon, the archipelago's vital heart. On January 9, 1945, American forces swarmed Lingayen Gulf, encountering an eerie calm, as General Yamashita, commander of the Japanese forces, had strategically withdrawn his 250,000 troops inland, choosing a protracted jungle defense over futile beach combat. This massive Allied advance, however, brought a chilling dread to the American prisoners of war held captive in places like Cabanatuan. For these men, the ghosts of Bataan, the distant orange-red fluorescence rippling across the horizon over Lingayen Gulf, was a terrifying beacon. Naval bombardment, confirmed by a POW expert, as star shells lighting up the place, signaled the imminent American landing. It was a potent cocktail of hope and visceral fear. The Japanese military, steeped in a code that deemed surrender an irrevocable shame and mandated death over capture, had already set a horrifying precedent on Palawan just weeks prior, where 150 American POWs were systematically incinerated and gunned down. This, coupled with the chilling August 1 kill-all order from the Japanese War Ministry, a directive to annihilate them all, as defeat loomed, made the probability of a massacre at Cabanatuan terrifyingly real. The dire intelligence confirming the existential threat to the Cabanatuan prisoners ignited a desperate race against time. On January 26, American guerrilla leader Robert Lapham, a man who had melted into the shadows of the Philippine jungle for 3 years, delivered the crucial, horrifying news. He alerted 6th Army G2 Officer Horton White that the prisoners were in immediate peril. White, in turn, presented the stark dilemma to General Walter Kruger, a leader known for his pragmatic, undramatic approach. After the 29th of January, White stated, The odds of finding prisoners alive would be quite remote. Kruger, a man of quiet resolve, immediately grasped the gravity. He understood that this was no longer a purely military objective, it was a humanitarian imperative. By all means, by any means, Kruger declared, authorizing a covert, high-risk rescue mission that placed human life above traditional military calculus. The mission was entrusted to Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci, known as Ham for his charisma, and his elite 6th Ranger Battalion. This choice signaled the commitment of America's finest, showcasing the nascent, romanticized ideal of Special Forces in World War II, a small, highly trained unit tasked with an impossible mission. The stakes were impossibly high, the ticking clock deafening. Yet the path to rescue was fraught with uncertainty. Initial reconnaissance by the legendary Alamo Scouts, while providing rudimentary sketches and escape routes, revealed critical intelligence gaps. Their initial estimate of Japanese forces around the camp proved dangerously low. As Colonel Mucci's frustration mounted, a new, vital piece of the puzzle arrived, in the form of Captain Juan Pajota, the Filipino guerrilla leader who knew the local terrain and enemy movements intimately. Pajota, observing Mucci's plan for a dusk assault, delivered a blunt assessment. "Sir, with all due respect, that is suicide." His up-to-the-minute intelligence confirmed a massive increase in Japanese troop concentrations, rendering an exposed approach across the camp's open prairie-like environ suicidal. Pajota's local knowledge proved invaluable not only in identifying threats but in officers of Dominus, to be in battlefield messages, and 20 wild to be, his officers of Dying stood presenting that all valuable, not only in identifying threats but in officers of Gild besides, and chromed ava, not only in identifying threats and chromed cold within battlefield messages, had quiet in times. When Mucci pondered how to transport the sick and immobile POWs, Pajota simply replied, "Carabao." These sturdy water buffalo, dragging their rickety carts, would solve a major logistical hurdle. The confirmed, overwhelming Japanese troop movements forced Mucci to delay the mission by 24 hours, a difficult but necessary decision that underscored the dynamic, fluid nature of battlefield intelligence. This critical delay, however, prolonged a precarious interlude for the prisoners. The initial Allied landing at Lingayen Gulf had forced the Japanese guards at Cabanatuan to withdraw, leaving the POWs in a temporary, unsettling state of freedom. They had even managed to raid abandoned Japanese supplies, creating a brief, surreal abundance. But the memory of Palawan, coupled with the commandant's explicit threat, "If anybody tries to escape, we kill everyone severely. If you do not obey, we kill all of you," instilled a deep, paralyzing fear of liquidation. This fragile sense of liberation was shattered by the arrival of new, battle-hardened Japanese troops, soldiers who were fagged out from combat, but still heavily armed and dangerous. Their presence fundamentally altered the camp's dynamic, re-establishing a tense and uncertain prisoner status. Then, a new symbol appeared in the sky, a P-61 Black Widow fighter plane, hard to get, a menacing, insectile-looking thing that was Buck Rogers come to life. Its appearance, a powerful emblem of American technological superiority, signaled the imminent arrival of Allied forces, intensifying both the desperate hope for rescue and the profound dread of Japanese, and sectile-looking then profound dread of Japanese Shah, reprisal. The clock was still ticking, but now it felt louder than ever. The final hours before the Cabanatuan raid felt less like a military operation and more like a pilgrimage to an unknown destiny. Colonel Henry Mucci, his pencil moustache now shorn, as a symbol of his unwavering focus, had already ensured that official photographers would document every step, recognizing the profound his days in Gira, that official photographers would document every step, recognizing the profound his days in Gira, recognizing the profound his days in Gira that Orsapan Destin, recognizing the profound his days in, recognizing the profound his days in Gira. From Gimba, the Rangers embarked on their arduous march, each step a testament to their commitment, a physical manifestation of the vow they had taken. Their journey now on foot, through the unforgiving Philippine landscape, stripped away any lingering illusions of an easy victory. Among them was Dr. Jimmy Fisher, the battalion surgeon, whose insistence on accompanying the raid had finally swayed Mucci. Fisher understood, perhaps more acutely than anyone, the critical medical needs of the men they were about to liberate, men who had endured years of unimaginable suffering. His presence was a stark reminder of the humanitarian imperative driving this dangerous infiltration. As the Rangers moved deeper into enemy territory, the pre-mission dread intensified. The lack of air support, a deliberate choice to maintain absolute secrecy, underscored their extreme vulnerability. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound, amplified the understanding that they were alone deep behind enemy lines, relying solely on their training, their courage, and the fragile cloak of darkness. As blue twilight descended, rapidly and completely, Lieutenant John Murphy led F Company Rangers into the camp perimeter. The P-61 Black Widow, a menacing insectile-looking thing, performed its coquettish dance overhead, its simulated engine troubles captivating the Japanese guards, drawing their eyes skyward. This aerial ballet was the perfect distraction, a lifesaver for the men below who were crawling through miasmal bottomlands and feathered thickets of bamboo. The darkness was absolute, like ink, a magical black veil that swallowed sight, leaving only the pungent smell of wild sage and the muted sounds of their own movements. They crept over the shallow, unmarked graves of executed prisoners, a chilling reminder of the stakes. One skittish, nervous little fella of a Japanese guard peered down from a tower, his gaze sweeping dangerously close before relaxing, attributing the noises to boredom or hallucination. Then, at precisely 7:45 p.m., the crack of Murphy's rifle shattered the silence. The camp erupted. Japanese guard towers and pillboxes were atomized within 15 seconds, their flimsy Nipa barracks chewed to pieces by the storm of bullets. Simultaneously, miles away at the Kabu River Bridge, a time bomb detonated on schedule. The explosion, a deep, muffled boom, signaled that Filipino guerrillas under Captain Juan Pachota had sprung their ambush. Japanese Commander Tomeo Oyabu, with bold obtuseness and multiple waves of Imperial Army soldiers, across the damaged span in a kamikaze charge, their banzai cries and weird incantations met by a merciless storm of enfiliding fire from Pajota's men. The distant firefight, a cacophony of explosions and machine gun fire, raged on, a vital bloody rearguard action, holding back thousands of Japanese reinforcements. Inside the camp, the liberation was met with profound confusion. "I heard screaming and moaning all around us," one prisoner recalled, "and I thought the Japs were finally massacring us." Emaciated men, dull-eyed and louse-infested, struggled to comprehend the sudden violent shift from captivity to freedom. They were scared vermin scattering for cover, many convinced this was a trap. Rangers had to shout, "We're Yanks, this is a prison break, head for the main gate." Ranger Alvy Robbins, growing annoyed, found himself arguing with hesitant prisoners. "I can't spend a lot of time arguing with you. There's thousands of Japanese just up the road. We got to get out of here in a hurry." Colonel Duckworth, the American commander, confronted the Rangers, demanding, "What the hell is going on here? Where'd you come from?" He was met with a blunt, "With all due respect, you are not in charge here. General MacArthur is. Now I suggest you head to the main gate before we kick your ass there. I'll apologize in the morning." The evacuation became a ghastly parade of men whose bodies were skin and bones, so light it was, just like you were carrying a 10-year-old kid. Abi Abraham, a survivor of Bataan, declared, "Yeah. The Abraham, a survivor of Bataan, declared, yeah. 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 The Abraham, a survivor of Bataan, the Abraham." I can walk. I walked out of Bataan, and by God I can walk out of here, even as he comforted a terrified Norwegian civilian who mistook a ranger for God. Amidst the chaos, tragedy struck. In the darkness and adrenaline-fueled confusion, F Company Ranger Charles Brown accidentally shot his comrade Roy Sweezy. "Killed by my own men," Sweezy cried, a heartbreaking testament to the brutal mistakes of combat. Ranger Francis Shilley, standing just 2 feet away, could only offer a quick, desperate blessing in a drainage ditch. The costs of war were immediate and personal. Then came another impossible decision. Provost Marshal Tommy Thomas and Abi Abraham reported that Edwin Rose, a deaf English civilian, was missing, having remained oblivious in a latrine throughout the entire maelstrom. Despite their plea, "We've got a man missing, Colonel. We have to do something." Colonel Mucci made the agonizing call. "I can't send any of my men," he stated, "the lives of hundreds of liberated prisoners outweighing the search for one." At approximately 9:30 p.m., the long night march to safety began, a glacial hike for the bedraggled caravan of over 500 Allied POWs, Rangers, Scouts, and Filipino guerrillas. This was a life march, a march of freedom, a stark, reverse image of the Bataan Death March. Though buoyed by the prospect of liberty, the prisoners' sore feet racked with dry beriberi, depleted vision from vitamin deficiencies, and minds generally addled by years in prison, made every step an ordeal. Rangers, zombie-eyed from lack of sleep, and fueled by pep pills, shed their clothes for the shivering prisoners and constantly inquired about their hometowns. Colonel Mucci resorted to white deceit, constantly promising just a few miles to go to maintain morale. The first stop was Platero, a crowded way station, bustling with gleeful shouts and laughter, where the prisoners found a brief respite, and the first opportunity for reckoning of their numbers. The journey continued through the cool, clear night under a sugaring of stars and a nearly full moon, with the steady hum of American night fighters overhead, a comforting presence. Around 2:30 a.m., the column reached the Rizal Road, a strategic bottleneck and a moment of extreme vulnerability. Moving with dim visibility, exposed to potential enemy traffic, Mucci and his rangers set up improvised barricades using bazookas and anti-tank grenades. It was a tremendously precarious endeavor, every shadow a potential threat. As dawn began to paint the Sierra Madre in pinkish hues around 6 a.m., the column neared a barrio controlled by the Hukbalahap, a shadowy, unpredictable force. Over 150 armed men guarded the village. Mucci, connecting with 6th Army headquarters by radio, faced a tense standoff. He employed diplomatic finesse, bluffing his way through, telling a Huk guerrilla captain, "If there's even a hint of trouble, I'll shoot you first." The dramatic confrontation, a curious gauntlet through the village, was a stark reminder of the complex, often dangerous political landscape of the Philippines and dangerous political beads. Disayans dayem, praising cameras of trouble, I'll shoot you first, or reminder of the complex, often dangerous political landscape. The glacial cavalcade pressed on, aided by a dozen carabao carts for the most incapacitated prisoners. These unlikely Karens ferried men like the critically injured Dr. Jimmy Fisher across the warm, turbid waters of the Pampanga River. The maddening slowness of the crossing, where the water reached only the axle's mic of head, became a literal and a metaphorical line of demarcation. Despite the ongoing hail of bullets peppering the water from Japanese pursuit, the prisoners, like the Hebrews of Exodus, waiting for the Red Sea to part, were possessed of sudden strength. But for Dr. Fisher, the journey was too much. Despite the desperate efforts of the Alamo Scouts and local Filipinos to construct a makeshift airstrip, his condition plummeted. He died that morning, a tragic loss, with Chaplain Hugh Kennedy performing burial rites for the selfless doctor who had insisted on being there. The arduous march, a wilderness wandering in the Bible, continued, the carabao teams kicking up thick shrouds of dust, the beasts themselves confused and irritable in their heavy yokes. But with every step, the distance between hell and home grew, measured in the resolute thud of boots and the quiet hope in men's hearts. The arduous journey from Cabanatuan, a reverse death march measured in hope rather than despair, slowly transitioned into the undeniable reality of rescue. Though Dr. Fisher, the selfless surgeon, succumbed to his wounds before reaching the makeshift airstrip at Balinkarin, his sacrifice underscored the precariousness of life, even in liberation, a stark reminder of the thin veil between survival and oblivion. The remaining men, after their overland trek, found themselves on the decks of the USS General Anderson, a troop transport that would carry them across the vast Pacific. On board, the threat of Japanese forces remained a chilling undercurrent. Tokyo Rose's broadcasts taunted the precious cargo, confirming that even at sea the war was far from over. Yet for the emaciated men, the ship was a floating sanctuary, a place of hot showers, clean clothes, and an almost overwhelming abundance of food, a stark contrast to the starvation that had defined their existence, and had defined their existence, and had defined their existence. But even as these men sailed towards freedom, another, more horrifying narrative unfolded across the same waters. The fate of those on the Oroku Maru and its successor Hell ships stood as a grim counterpoint to the Cabanatuan rescue. For the thousands of Allied prisoners packed into the suffocating pitch-black holds of those vessels, there was no daring raid, no promise of immediate relief. Their journey was one of unimaginable torment, suffocation, thirst so profound men drank their own urine, and the tragic irony of being bombed by their own forces, a horrifying friendly fire that claimed hundreds of lives, while the Cabanatuan survivors were welcomed aboard the General Anderson. The men of the Oryoku Maru faced a slow, agonizing death by fire, drowning, or the crushing impact of American bombs, a testament to the brutal, indiscriminate nature of war and the depths of Japanese cruelty. The Cabanatuan rescue, therefore, was not merely a triumph, it was an escape from a fate that had already claimed thousands, a desperate extraction from a system designed for annihilation. Finally, on a cold, thick March morning, the SS General Anderson pierced the fog of San Francisco Bay. The Golden Gate Bridge emerged, then the city, alive with a tornado of sound, sirens, church bells, foghorns, and the roar of fighter planes. Thousands lined the docks, screaming, waving, showering the ship with flowers and gifts. It was a homecoming of raw, unbridled emotion, a public embrace of heroes. Men like Robert Body, who had survived the hell of Cabanatuan, wept openly, unashamed, as they kissed American soil, a profound, primal act of reconnection to freedom. President Roosevelt's letter, broadcast live, welcomed them, acknowledging their valiant fight and immense suffering. War photographer Carl Maidens captured the scene for Life magazine, declaring the raid American history, and for a brief, shining moment the rescued prisoners were national heroes, embodying American resolve and the spirit of triumph. Yet, the public's embrace, however fervent, proved fleeting. As the war moved to its dramatic conclusion with the atomic bombs and the final defeat of Japan, the story of Cabanatuan and the individual suffering of its survivors began to recede. The ghosts of Bataan, once symbols of resilience, often found themselves adrift in a society eager to move on. Many carried invisible wounds, a profound psychological burden that manifested as nightmares, deep-seated anxiety, and a pervasive sense of abandonment. They wrestled with the shame of surrender, the guilt of survival when so many friends had perished, and the lingering feeling that nobody gives a damn. They were for a time living exhibits of a defeat America preferred to forget, their quiet suffering a testament to the war's enduring cost, long after the periods had ended. In the end, the Cabanatuan rescue endures as far more than a daring military operation. It stands as a pivotal humanitarian mission, a testament to America's profound commitment to its soldiers, even those deemed forgotten. It highlights the extraordinary bravery of the Rangers, the strategic genius of their commanders, and the indispensable courage and loyalty of Filipino guerrillas and civilians. This narrative, born from the monstrous trials of captivity and the realm of pure evil, ultimately illuminates the astonishing capacity of the human spirit to not only endure, but to rise from the ashes of despair. It is a powerful reminder of the importance of remembering and documenting such events, ensuring that the sacrifices are never truly forgotten, and challenging any narrative that might minimize such pivotal acts of heroism and the profound suffering that defined a generation.